Hey guys, it's Heather. Welcome back to our farm and the final installation in the Fermented February collaboration. So if you're already a seasoned veteran as part of this collaboration, you know the drill, but just in case you're new and you haven't heard of what's going on and it's February 27th, 2022, you still have time to participate. Tomorrow, February 28th, Anna over at the Fermented Homestead is going to be going through all of the comments on all of the Fermentation February videos and selecting 2 winners for Mason Top's fermentation kits. In the description below, I'm going to list all of the channels that participated. Go there and subscribe to all the channels, and I'm also going to list the entire playlist just to make it easy. So go to all of those videos if you haven't already, make a comment and enter yourself in the drawing. So today we're going to wrap the whole thing up with a bow and make some Jun Tea. So a lot of you are probably familiar with kombucha. This is extremely similar to kombucha, except for instead of being made with black tea and sugar, Jun Tea is made with green tea and honey. So I've got my supplies here, which is honey from our farm. Super excited that we're able to produce this now. I have our Jun SCOBY and starter, and I have some green tea in a gallon-sized vessel. You can ferment any quantity of Jun Tea that you want. I will say that if you're going to be going with an entire gallon, you're going to want at least 2 cups of already fermented and finished Jun Tea. A lot of the dormant SCOBYs and things that you can buy online come with the SCOBY, which stands for Symbiotic Colony of Bacteria and Yeast. It looks kind of like a mushroom. It's a strange little creature. And they come with probably around a cup of starter. That dormant starter is going to take a while to get kicked back into gear and to wake up. And really the last thing you want to do is put a small amount of starter in a large amount of tea and have that small amount of culture try to quickly proliferate and overtake what could be bad going on in the rest of the brew. You want to give your starter the best chance and the best benefit to overpower bad bacteria before it starts by giving more volume to the starter when it's first starting out. Sometimes waking up a dormant starter can take around a month. I actually had my Jun Tea stored in 3 different refrigerators over the span of 5 years. Kid you not, this baby was sleeping for 5 years. I did a lot of Jun Tea and kombucha fermentation when we lived in Colorado, and then we moved to Kansas, we moved to Kentucky, and I just kind of didn't do anything with it. I stuck my SCOBYs in the refrigerator and didn't do anything to them. So around 3 weeks ago, I had about a cup of Jun Tea starter and the SCOBY. I put it in here and I topped it off with a little bit of green tea and honey. I'm gonna bring you here close in a minute. I tend to smell everything to see how good it is, and I know that that's not always helpful, but if it's helpful to you, this should smell like apple juice. Like that's literally what it smells like. Maybe apple juice mixed with one of those like sparkling wines that you can get at some cocktail parties. That's what it smells like. It smells like one of those Welch's sparkling wines. We've also got some bubbles going on, and those little white dots that you see on the SCOBY, that's actually new bacteria and yeasts forming to make a new layer of SCOBY. So up here, this is SCOBY. This is our tea. And down here, these are yeasts. This is totally fine. Eventually, as the Jun gets more and more active, it will grow faster and faster. I don't want to leave this on the counter waiting for like an entire new layer of SCOBY to form, for example, because eventually what's left of the good bacteria in the ferment will peter out and require feeding. We're at that point, so I'm going to be making a full gallon of Jun Tea today. So again, because my starter is a little bit sleepy, I'm gonna use all 4 cups in this gallon. So I've got a nice clean gallon-sized jar and real honey. See, I have a habit of smelling things. I can't help it. All right, so these ratios are the same for Jun as they are with kombucha. So again, if you're familiar with that, we're going to be following basically the same steps. So I only need 1 cup of honey. If I go a little bit over that, it's not a big deal. Wonderful, lovely fall bloom honey in there. Now it's going to be super important that I don't add my starter and SCOBY to hot tea. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a half gallon of hot tea I'm gonna allow the honey to dissolve, and then I'm gonna top it off with cool water. All of this water is going to be filtered, unchlorinated. We don't want anything in there that could kill our good bacteria. A gallon is 16 cups, and normally when you brew tea, it's 1 tea bag per cup. When you're doing Jun or Kombucha, you should brew it at about half strength. So I'm gonna unbag 8 tea bags. I go ahead and cut the tabs off of all the tea bags because I'm just going to brew straight in the jar. When you have an established jug of kombucha going, you're going to have your starter and SCOBY already at the bottom here from the last time you did your brew. You don't want to be brewing your kombucha or your Jun on top of your SCOBY and starter. Again, you don't want to touch it with water that's hotter than about 110. So I'm doing it in my big vessel today. If you're doing a rebatch on top of your SCOBY and starter, make sure that you're doing this in a separate vessel and then adding it into your already established brew. 8 tea bags right on top. So I've heard that it's important to brew your tea with a cover on it. Apparently it keeps the constituents that are good for you in the tea in the jar. Otherwise they can come out in the steam. I don't know the truth behind that. I just do what I'm told. No, I don't. I don't know the science behind all of that. I just go ahead and do it. Okay, so remember this whole time we're working with clean hands, clean utensils. I'm just gonna take out these tea bags. We're done steeping. It's been about 3 to 5 minutes. I have also heard not to squeeze tea bags. Give it a good mix. I need that honey to be all dissolved. So I'm gonna fill up a little bit more with cool water to bring this down to a safe temperature for our SCOBY and starter. I have to remember that I have 4 cups of starter here, so I probably can't add too much more cool water, so I'm gonna have to allow this to sit and come down to temperature on its own. I'll note here too while we're talking about it, you want to make sure that in this process, this is called our first fermentation of the Jun Tea, that you use a wider mouth vessel. That SCOBY is going to grow and is going to cover the top of the liquid here, and you will have to remove it. If you use like one of those glass, I think it's called a growler, or one of those bigger like kombucha, you know what I mean, those jugs that have the smaller top, you're not gonna be able to get this SCOBY out of it, and it can present a little bit of a problem there. It's absolutely too hot, so I'm gonna let this cool down. And while that's cooling down, we can talk about my kombucha here that I have neglected quite well for about the same amount of time really that I've neglected my Jun over here. This one has just been neglected on the counter. And what I keep doing is every so often when I wind up with about a cup of starter just due to evaporation, I'll feed it around 2 cups of tea. And this is kombucha, so it's black tea and sugar. And the SCOBY eats, the SCOBY grows, and then it kind of slows down and goes dormant. This is something that is a little bit risky. Sometimes if you leave a ferment too long before feeding it, it can tend to grow mold. I'm not exactly sure how this phenomenon has existed for so long, but I guess if the process ain't broken, I won't fix it, but I need to feed this soon. See here, see all the different layers? This represents new growth of the healthy bacteria and yeast that are within the SCOBY, or I guess that make up the SCOBY. Down at the bottom, you can see some yeasts, and then that liquid in there, that is essentially vinegar at this point. But it started out as sweet tea. I mentioned this in my fermented, what the heck? I mentioned this in my fermented cottage cheese video too, if you saw that, but the Jun Tea, the kombucha, the sourdough, any other ferment that you have going on are separate bacterial and yeast cultures. Having them fermenting side by side could have them cross-culturing, and that can sometimes go bad. So I wanna make sure that I'm keeping all of my ferments about 3 feet apart. This guy's been sitting on my computer desk. The kombucha's been sitting next to my refrigerator. I'm about to start some sourdough and I've got to find a home for that. When I made fermented hot sauce, I let that ferment in my bedroom. Get creative. It can be kind of like home decor after a while. Okay, so it's cooled down now to about 105 degrees. So we've got our SCOBY and our starter. I've been calling it starter. All it really is Jun Tea that's already been fermented the first time. And I say the first time because if you feel like it, you can ferment it a second time, and we'll get there. Ta-da! Give it a gentle stir just to get all of the goodies incorporated. So now we're going to cover our ferment, and Jun Tea and kombucha really like to breathe while they're in their first ferment. We are going to do a second ferment. It's not super necessary, but the second ferment is where we'll get our carbonation. But for right now, we're not trying to create the carbonation that we'll have at the end. We're just trying to proliferate those really good bacteria and enzymes, things like that. Fun fact, you can write on glass with a Sharpie and it does come off with a scrubby sponge. So today's the 20th, and then I won't forget. Now Jun Tea does finish its ferment faster than a kombucha does. So if you're familiar with making kombucha, you know that sometimes the first ferment can be done in about 5 to 7 days. It really kind of depends on your taste preference, but that's about what it is for me in my conditions here. So we're gonna give this about 3 to 5 days and then give it a taste and see if it's fermented to our liking. All right, so it's been 5 days since we set the Jun Tea out to do its first ferment. It smells absolutely lovely, absolutely fermenty, and it looks good. So we have quite a few fermentation bubbles going on here. We've got some yeast at the bottom, perfectly normal. And we don't exactly have a new SCOBY forming here yet, but that is okay. Like I said, this guy was asleep in the fridge for 5 years. We're not gonna hold him to being perfect right out the get-go. So what I wanna do now is perform a taste test and make sure that this is fermented to my liking. You may find that you like your kombucha or your Jun to be a little bit more sour, a little bit more vinegary, and in that case you're going to want to let it ferment for a little bit longer. If you like your kombucha or Jun a little bit on the sweeter side, you want to let it ferment for a little bit less. So we've got a nice straw here. If there was a SCOBY that had formed over the top, I would gently push the SCOBY to the side and collect by placing my finger. It's perfect. This is done. The flavor is really light. It's very fruity. It's nearly appley. I likened it earlier to the Welch's sparkling apple juice. It's very much like that. Super delicious. The Jun Tea, like this, is a completely finished product. You can go ahead and drink this just as is. We are going to set this in bottles and do a second ferment. The benefit of doing a second ferment is that you can increase the number of probiotics and you can take advantage of some carbonation. Our first ferment was performed in the open air, so all of the little gases that were created in the fermentation process were able to escape. And we're going to be closing them in for this next fermentation step, and that's going to contribute to a really nice fizz. So the fizz that you'll get out of Jun Tea is going to be a smaller, lighter, bubblier experience than you would get with a kombucha. I like to compare it to kombucha is a little bit like beer and Jun is its classy cousin. Jun is a lot more like a champagne. So to do this second ferment, we're going to need a clean plate, clean hands, and some kind of fermentation vessel with a lid. You want to be really cautious about what you are doing your second fermentation in. When you are containing all of that carbonation, you want the vessel that you're using to be able to handle that without causing the possibility of breakage or seal failure. These are specific fermentation bottles. I got them on Amazon forever ago. I will say if you have old kombucha bottles, absolutely use these. These were made for that. In theory, I'd like to believe that a regular old mason jar with a screw top lid would be fine. Just be really careful. We'll get into the reasons why you need to be careful at the end. I've got to fish out my SCOBY here, but I need to save this. We're going to be using him later on. Okay, let's get down to this level for this pro tip. We are going to be leaving about 1.5 cups to 2 cups of our Jun Tea starter in this jug so we can use it to make more Jun Tea. I am going to want to stir in this yeast because I want all of the constituents in the Jun Tea to be uniform. I have learned the hard way that this yeast can pack quite a carbonation punch, and if you have one bottle with a lot of yeast in it, that bottle can be quite explosive. That's not to scare you. Look, we've got some fizz. See what I mean? The yeast contributes to the fizz, so you want it to be uniform, so you've got uniform fizz throughout your second ferment. It's already reacting. Now this second ferment step is the step where if you'd like to, you can add some flavorings. You could do some frozen fruit, some dried fruit. One of my favorite things to put in a second ferment is candied ginger. It's a super great flavor, especially with the Jun. It's a lot like ginger ale. And if you don't really want to flavor it at all, you just want a plain Jun or a plain kombucha, that's okay. You can add a pinch of sugar or a tiny bit of honey. Feed the microbes a little bit more and get them activated so that they can create the carbonation. I have a tiny little jar of honey. This is from our local honey shop here. Our local beekeeping supply. It's not going to take much, just a tiny drip. My goal is to have around 2 inches in the neck of free airspace for some of that carbonation gas to build up without causing too much pressure in the bottle. This matters later, trust me, leave yourself a 2-inch headspace. Like so, are we able to see it? It's about that far down. It's a little bit more than 2 inches, that's okay. So I've got my second ferment here, ready to go, and I'm going to allow this to sit on the counter for another 3 to 5 days for it to build up the carbonation and get a lot more flavor. So I could start a brand new batch of Jun today, exactly like I did before, using the same gallon-sized jug. I'm not gonna do that because honey is expensive and I can't afford to give up a cup of honey every 3 to 5 days. That's asking a lot, even for a beekeeper. So take it from me, you absolutely can put your SCOBY and your starter in a sealed jar in the refrigerator and take it out when you're ready. I do recommend when you see it in your fridge every once in a while, burping this jar. It is going to continue to ferment a little bit in the refrigerator. The refrigeration just slows the fermentation down a little, and you are going to want to let some of the gases escape. They're ready to consume really at any point. It's just going to be a matter of preference. So taste as you go, and you'll be able to establish the timeline for the first ferment and the second ferment that suit your tastes. So here's where we get to the part where it was really important that you left yourself at least 2 inches of headspace in your second ferment. So as these things ferment, they are creating gases inside that is building up pressure. And take it from me, it can get very, very explosive. So when you're opening your Jun Tea, your kombucha, your anything that's sealed this way, this is how you should do it so that you don't get kombucha blown in your face. It has happened to me. So with these type of swing top bottles, place it on a towel or in a bowl. You may need to go ahead and catch some spillover. Place your palm on the top. We're holding the top down and gently release. Did you hear that? Okay, that one wasn't bad, but sometimes you'll get the bubbles just coming up and you'll have to quickly close it again and just gradually keep burping it. Some of the bubbles may spill over the side. That's okay, that's why we've got our fail-safe thingy here. What you don't want to do is open it like this because it can and will spray out at you. Wow. This particular kombucha is an entire year old. This is cranberry kombucha that I made. The second ferment was January 30th, 2021. So let's give it a taste. This has cranberries in it, and because of that, I'm gonna go ahead and put my finger over the top just to stop some of the berries from going in the jar. Woo! This is cranberry kombucha that I fermented over a year ago. Oh, man, this is so delicious. Look at the little bubbles on the side. It's not part of the Fermented February collaboration, but I thought that a lot of you who are interested in ferments like this may be interested in a video that I took this summer where I fermented my own hot sauce. And look how well the sourdough starter is going. This is going to be a really exciting year of lots and lots of fresh baked bread.